Hey everyone, James Wyler here. Hope you're doing well. I'm a North Carolina-based producer over in the United States. I've got releases on Solid Grooves Raw, Repopulate Mars, DPE, SK Recordings, and Hera Records, Short Circuit, and more. I also have my own party brand called Louder in Silence, which is focused more around minimal music here in the States. Today, I'm going to be doing a breakdown of my track Sex Appeal on Solid Grooves Raw. Came out last year. I appreciate the team over at Phantom Sounds for having me on, and hopefully this kind of gives you an insight to some of the sounds that I use to put my tracks together, along with maybe some techniques that'll help you moving forward. We are going to include the stems on this, so if you want to use some of the sounds or want to try to remix it or anything like that, they should be available for download. Yeah, for those of you that don't know the track, I'm just going to go ahead and play a little clip right here of the second drop. That way, kind of get a listen to what we're going to be working through. Yeah, so that's the track. So what we'll kind of do is we'll just dive in. I'll kind of walk through my process and just kind of build the track around usually how I would start something. So I always kind of start with my kick. So in this case, here was a kick sample. As you can see, I've gone through quite a lot of kicks on this one. I'll typically, it won't be like the first one that I find. I'll kind of go through a bunch of different samples, throw them in, and constantly keep switching them out until I find the right one. Yeah, I was trying to go for something darker, a little bit more gritty. So I have this one that's got, it doesn't have too much high end, and usually I want my kicks to really push through in the mix. So I will always throw a kick or click on top of it. So for those of you that don't have the sample pack, it's a sample pack called Clicks for Kicks. I would highly advise getting it as it really kind of helps your kick punch through in the mix. Here, I'll show you just what this sounds like. So yeah, just a simple little sound, but it helps. It makes such a big difference. Just kind of gives it that extra little push through the mix, but not too much process. Yeah, hardly any processing. Really, just have it in mono, a little bit of drum bus, and yeah. So once I kind of figure out the kick that I want to use, I will start to build out my percussion. I typically like to lean towards that first, kind of build something that's groovy. I think I was watching a video that Archie Hamilton did or someone did a couple years ago, and they said, if your track sounds sick with just a kick and the percussion, it's going to sound awesome because the hi-hat and the clap usually really help glue that all together, and those you can find those samples fairly easy to fit into the tracks a little bit. So that's kind of what I'll go through first, and then we'll kind of just build the drum group up and then go through the bass line. Usually I'll do a mixture of both. I will do some samples just straight in. I'll do some samples where I do a lot of automation or different processing just to kind of switch it up. I feel like if you're just throwing samples in there, it's easier to catch on and typically not as original. It's a little bit difficult to stand out because anyone can use a sample pack, so anyone can kind of get those sounds. So it's what you do with those sounds that's really going to separate you apart as a producer. So let me go through some of these elements. Just kind of bringing that in and out with some automation. Here's like a tom or bongo type sound. I've got this, which I believe is just a sample straight in, but I really try to beef up my mid-range. So I'll use some of these loops as more of like mid-range textures just to kind of build that up, and I'll kind of have them play them over each other. I think both of these are the same. Yeah. So yeah, just use that loop and cut off a bunch of the highs and lows just to really kind of push through in the mids and have it at like a lower volume. That way it kind of sits more in the background. And then similar to this one. So yeah, with those, I'll typically do those at lower volumes. That way they're not sitting as up front in the mix and kind of sitting back behind and more of like a texture layer to help beef the track up and make the drum sound full. I feel like where a lot of producers sometimes don't add that stuff, you can kind of the track almost feels dry in a way. So I will keep building my drum groove out until I feel like there's enough beef and oomph behind it just from that kind of mid-range area. And then this last part, the glitch stuff. So this is typically where I get a little bit more creative, trying to add like those kind of glitchy Wheats type sound elements. So I'm going to A/B with the sample dry by itself without the processing, and then we'll do it with the processing. So yeah, just kind of a cool travel loop. Yeah, and so I like to use LFOs a lot. It just helps give a lot of randomness and like consistent change and really mix it up. Using that on some grain delays and adding maybe some flangers just to kind of make the sound feel like it's moving and kind of all over the place. A lot of it's coming from the grain delay. Yeah, just to kind of keep it moving and like I said, like I mentioned, doing stuff like this is what's going to separate your tracks out from the pack. So try to get creative with this stuff, and you can use it on. And I typically use like drum loops, like top loops or something, and throw it in there, and then just try to mess with these. This one's pretty tame. Sometimes I'll have like 4 or 5 LFOs and multiple delays and some flangers or phasers, just kind of depends, but I try to just get with super creative with it. And worst case, if you feel like you're adding too much and it kind of sounds weird, you can always take away. So yeah, all those elements together. A big part that I think makes a difference in a lot of this minimal music too is a lot of percussion really has to have a very specific place. You don't want to get too messy to where it's all over the place, but you do want to make sure that you have enough going to where they're kind of like playing off each other and some call and responses. So, for example, like these two are playing off each other. So this one and this one. Call, response. So those two playing off each other well, leave a gap there. That way it kind of extends out the loop a little bit. And then obviously with this one changing up consistently. So yeah, it just kind of gives it some groove to it. And I do add groove to all of my drum elements. In this track specifically, I use this swing 1665. Recently, and more of my newer stuff and stuff that's upcoming, I am actually starting to use some of the MPC swings, the 16th note ones. Those are really nice. So they have some pretty good groove on it. So it'd be worth checking those out and seeing which ones you like best. Sometimes I'll bring the groove down. Yeah, so this one I brought the timing down to 50%, just to not have it too swung. Sometimes I feel like if it's too swung, it sounds like a lot of these sounds will start to go off a little bit, and it's just it gets a little bit messy. But then going into the hi-hats, so this one I've got 3 main ones going, or well 2 and then a shaker, but I'll play this all together. So I've got one where I've cut off a bunch of like basically up to what almost 3K. That way this one's really kind of the main hi-hat. Yeah, this one's more in the background. Yep, and cut off a bunch of the higher end frequencies just to kind of once again, layering really is going to help you beef up your sound. It's super easy for anyone to just go through a sample pack, keep going and checking different ones and then throw one hi-hat in there. And yeah, I mean, it could probably sound good. But I feel like layering your tracks, especially on the minimal side, like really just kind of helps beef your tracks up a little bit. So, yeah, I'll typically do, 2 or 3 layers, and you'll see in the claps too, I did a bunch of layers on there as well, but also have the shaker, which is kind of, I cut off some of the highs. It's more sitting in the background a little bit. And then I did have an open hi-hat, but looks like I got rid of that or turned that one off. So don't even have an open hi-hat in that one. So yeah, so you've got the hats. Let's see. So the hats, percussion. So as you can hear in one of those loops, I do still have the clap in, but it's such a low and lower volume and a lot of the high ends out that it'll kind of sit back in the mix as more of like a texture feel layer. And now you'll see I've got, let's see, 3 claps on here, or a clap and 2 snares. And so, yeah, this one you'll see, I think is a little bit more of the higher end one. Yeah, so that one's on the highs, a little bit more in the mids. See, yep, and cut off some of all the high end right there. Same with this one. And both these I added, so these two specifically, added a bunch of reverb in it. If I turn that off, see how dry it sounds? It's just, it's adding that reverb. So I do reverbs on all my drums. I'll do it as like a return channel. And so I use Pro Reverb, this drum studio one, really helps get your drums tight and feeling like they're sitting a little bit cohesively. So let's do. So all those, and when I'm gain staging these, I want to try to make them all sound like one sound. So not that it's like multiple sounds playing at the same time and interfering with each other. And a lot of that has to do with the levels. So what I'll do is I'll start this at 0, like, or minus 60 all the way down, and I'll bring it up until I can start hearing it, with my main clap that's going, kind of see what it sounds like, and then I'll go way higher than it just to kind of get your ears used to hearing that sound. And then once I start to bring it back down, that's when I'll really set the level, because you can kind of see or listen and hear how it becomes more like one sound, if that makes sense. But I'll play the drums in its entirety. And so if I were to turn off that verb, so a lot of these elements, this one too, this one as well, I use reverb on most of my drum elements because it really helps make the drums sound like they're all as one, they're all acting in like one similar space. A lot of like what I like to think about is when I'm producing, I have my main elements in the mix, right? Like my kick, my main hi-hat, my clap, kind of centered-ish. And then everything else is like a box, and I'm working around it and trying to make stuff float and, kind of bounce all over the place and play more cohesively as a track, versus like everything being in the middle, kind of squishing on top of each other and sounding all sounding messy and messing up the mix. So if I do this percussion, see, when you turn the reverb off, it just sounds so dry. Really just helps kind of fill out the space a lot. So yeah, so that's all my drums. And once I get to this point, yeah, so then I started adding in some texture pieces. So I think I have one texture. Yeah, so this texture loop that I cut, you'll see I cut some of the volumes on it. Yes, this way they're kind of all playing off each other. So if I were to just do that along with all my percussion. See, not very loud, super subtle in the background, but you can kind of hear it's moving over this way a little bit and this way. So kind of making that more sit in the background and be an element that kind of like catches your ear here and there. I use Microshift as a widening plugin. So, once again, when I think about the way that my tracks are, a lot of these like glitchy texture type elements, I want more out and back. So for my Microshift, what I do is I have a return that as you bring the wet signal in right here, it literally makes the sound kind of go like this versus like just panning it all the way to the left or panning all the way to the right, but just kind of giving the whole sound space itself. So yeah, I'll kind of go through some of these FX. I think some of all the vocals are in here too. So I'll go through those and then we will add the bass line. But, just little hits like this. And this one, this. Simple stuff. Just adding some echo and delay on it just to kind of keep it rolling. A little crash right there. So yeah, nothing too crazy. And so, all that stuff together really kind of sounds pretty cohesive. Yeah, so I think that point, that's when I would kind of look to, all right, now I need to start making a bass line. Let's get a groove going. So in this one I use the MIDI. So I just use this boom bass preset right here. And I use Sting to kind of generate some MIDI bass lines. So for those of you who don't know what Sting is, it's basically a sequencer that will spit out MIDI notes and play your synth. And if you click this smiley face, it will keep changing up. Simply what I like to do is I'll go through a bunch of those and figure out which ones I'll record out a couple, pick which ones I like and maybe chop those up, or sometimes I'll take out notes. If it's just some of the notes I feel like are clashing a little bit different, I'll take them out because I typically don't like to have a lot of bass line notes because I do fill up my drums and I like my kick, my bass line, and my percussion to kind of all play off each other. That way it gives it kind of like a little bit groovier of a feel. So I'll go ahead and add that in. And so for this, I mean, really just the processing is kind of, so I'll do some EQ just to take out, EQing is kind of on everything. I'll do EQs just to take out some of the bad frequencies. I used RBass, which is a Waves plugin. If you don't have it, it's great for bass lines. It's basically like a saturator plugin for specific frequencies. So you can saturate, kind of whatever frequency works well based on, whatever key it's in or whatever, just to kind of help the bass really play well or like sit well in the mix in comparison to the kick. And then obviously some saturation usually. I did use a compressor as well, more to kind of make the bass sound feel fuller and bring out some of those notes that were sitting a little bit too far down in the mix. And then I compress the whole thing to the bass line, obviously side chaining that and then monoing the bass. And then some of this like filter and stuff is just some automated pieces that probably go up throughout. Let's see. So yeah, through here, I'm probably bringing the frequency up. Yeah, just to kind of make the bass feel like it's going out. Yeah, so pretty straightforward on that piece. And then, once I kind of had this groove, so trying to think, I felt like this was definitely a darker, more solid groove style tracks. I was like, okay, I feel like they like to lean into, darker vocals or kind of like lower male vocals. And so, honestly, just looking through Splice, I found a pack that had a bunch of one shots in it. And then I just kind of created like my own kind of vocal verse. So
flow.
Yep, make that wider too, so it kind of sits more out in the mix.
Conscious. Yeah.
So yeah, all these are literally from the same pack. It worked well because I was able to, kind of grab all those, and I felt like these vocals were for the style track that I was going for, and so kind of having them all together, it's kind of created my own phrase.
Flow. Conscious. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then, I mean, that's pretty much all the elements. Obviously with some FX kind of throughout the track, but yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff is pretty simple from like a sound selection standpoint. And I feel like that's, one of the biggest pieces is making sure that the sound selection's there. I feel like if it's easy to go. I mean, you could sit there and go through sample packs all day, but really trying to make sure all the sounds sound cohesive is a huge piece. And then from, kind of like from an arrangement standpoint, so I like to do a lot of these like markers up top. So if you don't do these, this could also help you really well. Maybe look at, and this is a good way to practice arrangement too, is, hey, maybe look at some of the tracks that you like, whether it's on a label that you like and bring that track into Ableton and kind of go through the structure of some of these tracks and see, hey, where do they bring in certain elements, or where does stuff change up, or where does their breakdown go? And that could kind of help give you an idea, so this one, obviously, you've got your DJ intro. So when I kind of bring the bass in, and so on and so forth, and all these have, different words to them. So, hey, I want to make sure I brought in new elements here, new elements there, bring out the kick, break one, and kind of, doing that throughout the whole track. That way, hey, from a holistic visual standpoint, you can kind of see and it really kind of helps me timestamp throughout of how I need to structure my tracks. But from the mixing standpoint, I do a lot of group processing. I do use a lot of returns. So, for example, I think that type of mixing can really kind of help you get the specific sound that you're looking for. So for example, these drums, I always mix with Decapitator and Devil Lock, just to kind of give it some saturation. And then Devil Lock gives it like a little bit of more of like a gritty punch type feel. So let's see if I can A/B these and see if that gives a more accurate representation set with it on. You can just see how much more forward that brings all those sounds in the mix and just gives them a little bit more presence along with a little bit of grit to it. Similar to like the style that I typically like to make if you are looking to kind of make more of those darker drums. But yeah, that's pretty much all the elements. Once again, we're gonna add some of the stems on there. So if you do want to go in and kind of mess around with some of the sounds and figure out how to make some similar stuff. One last thing too is the synth. So this one I did use some delays and everything to kind of make this, once again, I'll turn it off with the sound. Let's do. So yeah, kind of a cool sound, but trying to mess with it. Let's turn this on. So now it's just way different. Cool sound. That's the thing. If you're going through a track or you're trying to like build stuff in a track and you like a sound, throw it in there and then try to mess with it. A lot of this processing and automation can really make a huge difference, especially if you're doing this on a lot of different sounds. A lot of subtle little things here and there really help build out the track. So, those are definitely some things to consider and think on. But yeah, once again, if anyone has any questions, hit it in the comments and I can, I'll definitely go on and respond to some of those. But once again, we're gonna add some of these sounds in here. So if you like the vocals or you like any of the sounds and want to use them for your tracks or want to try to make a track with these sounds, definitely take a look at those. And if there's ever any questions, feel free to reach out. Love talking about studio stuff and music production. So once again, thanks for tuning in and appreciate everyone. Hope this was helpful.